Before we dive into this forbidden knowledge that has been hidden from humanity for over 1,000 years, I need to ask you something important. What time is it where you are right now, and where in the world are you watching this from? I'm asking because what I'm about to reveal to you transcends time and space itself, and understanding your current moment in this physical reality will help you grasp the profound truth about what happens when consciousness leaves the body, because right now, in this very moment, you are experiencing the same fundamental awareness that continues after death, the same consciousness that the ancient Tibetan masters mapped with terrifying precision in the most forbidden spiritual text ever written, the Bardo, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But here's what they don't want you to know. This isn't just a book about death, it's a manual for navigating consciousness itself, a step-by-step guide that reveals exactly what your awareness experiences during the 49 days between death and rebirth, and why the Tibetan Lamas kept this knowledge so secret that they would only whisper it into the ears of the dying. You've probably been told that death is the end, that consciousness simply ceases when the brain stops functioning. But what if I told you that's the biggest lie ever perpetuated by those who want to keep you trapped in fear and ignorance? What if death is actually the beginning of the most incredible journey your soul will ever take, a journey so profound and transformative that ancient masters spent their entire lives preparing for it? The truth is, consciousness doesn't die with the body. It embarks on a 49-day odyssey through dimensions of reality that make our physical world look like a shadow on the wall of Plato's cave, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead is the only text that maps this journey with surgical precision, describing exactly what you'll encounter, exactly what choices you'll face, and exactly how to navigate each stage to achieve liberation or ensure a favorable rebirth. But here's where it gets even more shocking. The Tibetan masters didn't just theorize about these 49 days, they experienced them directly through advanced meditation practices that allowed them to consciously navigate the bardo states while still alive, essentially dying and returning with detailed maps of the afterlife territories. And what they discovered will shatter everything you think you know about death, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. The word bardo literally means intermediate state or gap, and according to the deepest Tibetan teachings, we actually experience bardo states every single day of our lives. When we fall asleep, when we dream, when we lose consciousness during deep meditation, and most importantly, when we die. But the death bardo is unlike any other because it lasts exactly 49 days and follows a precise sequence that every soul must navigate, regardless of their beliefs, religion, or preparation, and this is why the ancient masters considered this knowledge so dangerous that they encoded it in symbolic language and hid it within layers of metaphor and mystical imagery. The first thing you need to understand is that the moment of death is not a single event but a process that unfolds over several stages, beginning with what the Tibetans call the outer dissolution when the five senses shut down one by one, followed by the inner dissolution when the subtle energies that animate the body withdraw from the chakras and energy centers, and finally the secret dissolution when consciousness itself separates from the physical form. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. During this process, every soul experiences the same sequence of visions, sounds, lights, and encounters with spiritual beings, described with incredible detail in the Bardo Thodol thousands of years before modern near-death research began documenting identical experiences in hospitals around the world. The first day after death marks the beginning of what's called the Chikai Bardo, or the Bardo of dying, and this is when something extraordinary happens that most people completely miss because they're not prepared for it. The consciousness experiences the clear light of death, a brilliant, all-pervading luminosity that represents the naked awareness of your true nature, pure and unobscured by thoughts, emotions, or physical sensations. And according to the Tibetan masters, if you can recognize this clear light and merge with it completely, you achieve instant liberation and never have to be reborn again. But here's the tragic truth. Most souls are so overwhelmed by the sudden freedom from physical limitations that they panic and flee from this ultimate reality, missing the greatest opportunity for spiritual liberation that exists. The text describes this moment with poetic precision. The ground luminosity which you did not recognize in life will dawn, radiant and clear, without obstruction or contamination, like a mirage shimmering on a plain in springtime, but the consciousness, conditioned by a lifetime of grasping and fear, recoils from this infinite openness and immediately begins the process of creating new forms of limited identity. And this is why the Tibetan masters spent decades training students to recognize and embrace this clear light, because they knew that most souls would have less than 3 days to achieve liberation before the bardo experience becomes increasingly complex and difficult to navigate. Days 2 through 7 represent the Konyi bardo or the bardo of Dharmata, and this is where the journey becomes both terrifying and magnificent as consciousness encounters what can only be described as the fundamental building blocks of reality itself, experiencing visions of peaceful and wrathful deities that are actually projections of your own mind's deepest wisdom and most primitive fears. But here's the secret the lamas never shared publicly: these aren't external beings judging your soul. They're aspects of your own consciousness revealing itself in its most pure and distorted forms, and how you react to these visions determines whether you move toward liberation or deeper into the cycle of rebirth. On the second day, the soul encounters Vairocana Buddha, radiating brilliant white light from the center of reality, surrounded by infinite space and representing the wisdom of ultimate reality. But if the consciousness has spent a lifetime lost in ignorance and delusion, this pure white light appears too intense and frightening, causing the soul to turn away toward a softer, dimmer light that leads directly back into human rebirth. And this pattern repeats each day with different Buddhas representing different aspects of enlightened consciousness. Akshobhya Buddha appears on day 3 with brilliant blue light representing mirror-like wisdom. Ratnasambhava Buddha manifests on day 4 with golden yellow radiance embodying the wisdom of equality. Amitabha Buddha emerges on day 5 with red light symbolizing discriminating awareness, and Amagasiti Buddha presents green luminosity on day 6 representing all-accomplishing wisdom. But in each case, the unprepared consciousness chooses the dim, comfortable path that leads back into limited existence rather than embracing the brilliant liberation that's being offered. But day 7 is where something truly extraordinary happens that the Tibetan masters consider the most important secret in the entire text. All 5 Vajrayana Buddhas appear simultaneously in what's called the mandala of the 5 Buddha families, creating a symphony of colored lights and sounds that represents the complete spectrum of enlightened consciousness. And if the soul can recognize that these magnificent beings are actually projections of its own awakened nature, it can merge with any one of them and achieve instant Buddhahood. But here's what's absolutely shocking: the text reveals that even if you miss this opportunity, you get a second chance through what are called the wrathful deities, terrifying beings that appear during days 8 through 14. But these aren't demons or evil spirits as they appear to be. They're the same peaceful Buddhas expressing themselves in wrathful form to shake the consciousness out of its stubborn attachment to limited identity. The wrathful deities are described with horrifying detail that would make the most graphic horror movie scene tame: beings with multiple heads breathing fire, drinking blood from skull cups, dancing on corpses, surrounded by flames and wielding weapons of destruction. But the secret teaching reveals that these terrifying appearances are actually expressions of fierce compassion, the enlightened mind's way of cutting through the ego's final desperate attempts to maintain its separate existence. And if the consciousness can see through the frightening forms to recognize the wisdom and love beneath, it can still achieve liberation even at this late stage in the bardo journey. Days 15 through 21 mark the transition into the Siddha bardo or the bardo of becoming. And this is where the soul's journey takes a dramatic turn as it begins the process of seeking rebirth. But what happens during these 7 days will determine not just where you're reborn, but the entire trajectory of your next lifetime. And the Tibetan masters encoded specific instructions for navigating this crucial phase that can mean the difference between liberation and centuries of continued suffering. During this phase, the consciousness experiences what modern near-death researchers call the life review, but the Tibetan text describes it with far greater detail and spiritual significance. The soul witnesses every action, word, and thought from its previous lifetime, not as judgment from an external deity, but as a natural consequence of karma ripening like fruit on a tree. And here's what's absolutely crucial to understand. This review isn't about punishment or reward in the conventional sense. It's about the consciousness recognizing the patterns that have kept it trapped in cycles of suffering and the opportunities that exist for breaking free from these limitations. The text describes how the soul sees with perfect clarity every moment of kindness and cruelty, every choice made from wisdom or ignorance, every relationship that brought healing or harm, and most importantly, every opportunity for awakening that was either embraced or rejected. And this comprehensive understanding creates what the masters call the great remorse, not guilt in the psychological sense, but a profound recognition of how much unnecessary suffering was created through ignorance of one's true nature, and this remorse becomes the fuel for either liberation or the intense desire for rebirth that drives the soul forward into its next incarnation. But here's where the Tibetan teachings reveal something that will completely change how you understand karma and rebirth. During days 22 through 28, the consciousness encounters what are called the 6 realms of existence, each representing different states of consciousness that souls can inhabit based on their predominant mental and emotional patterns. And these aren't necessarily physical locations as they're often portrayed, but dimensions of experience that reflect the quality of awareness the soul has cultivated. The God realm appears as a paradise of endless pleasure and luxury, attracting souls whose primary motivation is the pursuit of happiness and comfort. But the masters warn that this realm is actually a subtle trap because the constant gratification prevents any spiritual growth and eventually leads to even greater suffering when the good karma that created this experience is exhausted. The jealous God realm manifests as a competitive battlefield where beings fight constantly for power and status, drawing in souls whose consciousness is dominated by envy and the need to be superior to others. The human realm presents itself with all its familiar mixtures of joy and sorrow, attraction and aversion, creating a balanced environment that offers the greatest opportunities for awakening but also the greatest potential for creating more karma through ignorant choices. The animal realm appears as a state of pure instinctual existence, attracting souls whose awareness has become dominated by basic drives for food, sex, and survival without any capacity for reflection or spiritual development. The hungry ghost realm manifests as a condition of insatiable craving where beings have enormous appetites but tiny mouths, symbolizing souls whose consciousness is consumed by addictions and desires that can never be satisfied. And the hell realm presents itself as various states of intense physical and emotional torment, drawing in souls whose awareness is dominated by hatred, violence, and the desire to harm others. But here's the crucial secret the masters teach. None of these realms are permanent destinations. They're all temporary states of consciousness that souls move through based on their karmic patterns and mental habits. Days 29 through 35 represent what the text calls the time of judgment, but this isn't judgment by an external deity as portrayed in other religious traditions. It's a profound self-recognition process where the consciousness faces what the masters call the mirror of karma, a perfect reflection of every intention, action, and consequence from not just the previous lifetime but all previous lifetimes. And this mirror reveals the deep patterns that have shaped the soul's journey through countless incarnations. But here's what's absolutely revolutionary about the Tibetan understanding. This judgment isn't about punishment or reward. It's about choice and opportunity, because even at this stage, the consciousness can still choose liberation by recognizing that all these karmic patterns are ultimately empty of inherent existence, like dreams or mirages that appear real but have no solid substance. The text describes how the soul meets various karmic creditors, beings who represent relationships and obligations from previous lives that still need resolution. And these encounters can be either opportunities for healing and forgiveness or traps that bind the consciousness to new cycles of karmic debt, depending on how the soul responds to these meetings. If the consciousness reacts with fear, anger, or attachment, it creates new karmic bonds that will determine its next rebirth. But if it responds with wisdom, compassion, and detachment, It can resolve even the most complex karmic entanglements and move closer to liberation. During this phase, the soul also encounters its own karmic seeds, dormant potentials from previous actions that are waiting to manifest as future experiences, and the masters teach specific visualization practices for transforming negative karmic seeds into positive ones, essentially rewriting the soul's future through the power of enlightened intention. But this requires a level of spiritual skill that can only be developed through years of preparation while still in physical form. Days 36 through 42 mark the final phase of the bardo journey, where the consciousness must make its ultimate choice between liberation and rebirth, and the Tibetan masters describe this period as the most dangerous and the most promising because it's the last opportunity to achieve freedom from the wheel of samsara before being drawn back into physical existence. But it's also when the gravitational pull toward rebirth becomes almost irresistible as the soul's karmic patterns begin crystallizing into the circumstances of its next incarnation. During these 7 days, the consciousness experiences what the text calls the gathering of the elements, where the 5 fundamental energies that will form its new body begin coalescing based on the dominant emotions and mental patterns that have emerged during the bardo journey, and this process happens according to precise spiritual laws that the Tibetan masters mapped with incredible detail. Souls dominated by anger and hatred are drawn toward rebirth in the hell realms, where they can experience the full consequences of their violent intentions. Beings whose consciousness is filled with greed and attachment are pulled toward the hungry ghost realm, where their insatiable cravings create constant torment. Souls whose awareness is clouded by ignorance and dullness gravitate toward animal rebirths, where consciousness operates primarily through instinct. Beings whose minds are consumed by jealousy and competition are attracted to the jealous god realm, where they can engage in endless battles for supremacy. Souls whose consciousness is balanced between wisdom and ignorance, compassion and selfishness, are drawn to human rebirth, where they have optimal conditions for spiritual development. And beings whose awareness is dominated by pride and the pursuit of pleasure are pulled toward the God realms, where they can enjoy the fruits of their positive karma until it's exhausted and they fall back into lower states of existence. But here's the most profound secret revealed in the Tibetan teachings about these final days. Even as the soul is being drawn toward rebirth, there are specific moments when liberation is still possible through what the masters call the recognition of illusory body, where the consciousness realizes that all these experiences of judgment, choice, and rebirth are actually mental projections without ultimate reality, like a person waking up from a vivid dream and recognizing that none of it was actually happening. The text provides detailed instructions for achieving this recognition, including visualization practices where the dying consciousness imagines itself as a deity or enlightened being, essentially using the same creative power that normally creates karmic bondage to instead create liberation. But this requires tremendous spiritual skill and preparation because the momentum toward rebirth becomes incredibly strong during these final days, like a river rushing toward a waterfall that becomes harder and harder to resist the closer you get to the edge. Days 43 through 49 represent the actual process of rebirth selection and conception, where the consciousness makes its final choices about the circumstances of its next lifetime, and the Tibetan masters reveal that even these choices aren't random but follow specific patterns based on the soul's unresolved karma, unfulfilled desires, and spiritual development needs, creating what they call the perfect learning environment for the soul's continued evolution, whether that evolution leads toward greater wisdom or deeper ignorance. The text describes how during these final 7 days, the consciousness surveys various potential parents and families, drawn to those whose karmic patterns most closely match its own unresolved issues and learning needs, and this selection process happens primarily through emotional resonance rather than rational choice. Souls are attracted to parents whose relationships mirror their own unhealed wounds, creating opportunities for either healing these patterns or deepening them depending on how conscious the new incarnation becomes. And this is why the masters teach that every family situation, no matter how difficult or traumatic, contains perfect spiritual lessons if the soul can recognize them as such rather than simply reacting from unconscious programming. The moment of conception occurs when the consciousness fully commits to a particular rebirth scenario, usually triggered by witnessing the sexual union of the chosen parents and feeling either attraction to one parent or aversion to the other, creating the emotional charge necessary to pull the consciousness into physical form. But here's what's absolutely crucial to understand: even at this final moment, liberation is still theoretically possible if the soul can recognize the empty nature of all these experiences and choose instead to dissolve back into the clear light of pure awareness. But what makes the Tibetan Book of the Dead so extraordinary isn't just its detailed mapping of the 49-day journey, it's the practical instructions it provides for navigating each stage consciously and skillfully, transforming what could be a terrifying ordeal into the ultimate spiritual opportunity. And these instructions aren't just theoretical philosophy but precise techniques developed through centuries of careful observation and experimentation by masters who had learned to die consciously while still alive. The text reveals that the key to successfully navigating the bardo lies in what the masters call recognition, the ability to see through the various appearances and experiences to the underlying empty nature of consciousness itself, and this recognition can only be developed through specific meditation practices that train the mind to remain calm and aware in the face of any experience, no matter how pleasant or terrifying it might appear to be. One of the most important practices described in the text is called phawa, or consciousness transference, where the practitioner learns to eject their consciousness from the physical body through the crown of the head at the moment of death, ensuring that awareness enters the bardo in the most favorable state possible rather than being confused or traumatized by the dying process. And masters of this practice are said to be able to transfer their consciousness to pure lands or enlightened realms without having to navigate the dangerous territories of the intermediate bardo states. Another crucial practice revealed in the text is the cultivation of what the masters called bardo body, a subtle form of consciousness that the soul inhabits during the 49-day journey, and understanding the nature and capabilities of this bardo body is essential for navigating the intermediate states skillfully. The bardo body has several remarkable characteristics that differ completely from physical embodiment. It can travel instantly to any location simply through intention. It can pass through solid matter without obstruction. It possesses miraculous powers of perception that allow it to see and hear across vast distances. It experiences emotions and sensations with incredible intensity, and most importantly, it's completely malleable and can be shaped by the consciousness that inhabits it, which is why the masters teach specific visualization practices for maintaining beneficial forms and avoiding the terrifying appearances that can arise from unconscious fear and confusion. The text explains that souls who haven't prepared for the bardo experience often create nightmarish versions of the bardo body based on their deepest fears and guilt, while those who have trained in the practices can maintain luminous, peaceful forms that help them navigate the intermediate states with confidence and clarity. And this difference in bardo body experience can determine whether the soul achieves liberation, favorable rebirth, or falls into lower realms of existence. The Tibetan masters also reveal specific liberation through hearing practices that can be performed for someone who has died, where trained practitioners recite the bardo instructions directly to the deceased person's consciousness, guiding them through each stage of the 49-day journey and reminding them of the liberation opportunities that are available at every moment. And these practices are based on the understanding that consciousness remains aware and responsive to guidance for the entire bardo period, even though it may appear to outside observers that the person is simply dead. The effectiveness of these practices depends on several factors, including the spiritual development of both the deceased and the person offering guidance, the clarity and power with which the instructions are delivered, and most importantly, the deceased person's familiarity with the teachings while they were still alive, because souls who have never heard these concepts before may not recognize the opportunities being pointed out to them, while those who have studied and practiced the bardo teachings can immediately apply the instructions and achieve liberation even if they weren't able to do so during their lifetime. But here's where the Tibetan understanding becomes truly revolutionary and challenges everything we've been taught about death and dying. The masters reveal that the 49-day bardo journey isn't just something that happens after physical death. It's actually a process that every consciousness goes through regularly during sleep, meditation, and moments of altered awareness. And by learning to navigate these mini bardos skillfully while still alive, we can prepare ourselves for the ultimate bardo experience that comes with death. Every night when you fall asleep, your consciousness undergoes a process remarkably similar to dying. The physical senses shut down, the body becomes immobile, and awareness enters dream states that mirror many of the bardo experiences described in the Tibetan text, and masters who have learned to maintain lucid awareness during sleep report encountering the same peaceful and wrathful deities, experiencing the same clear light states, and facing the same liberation opportunities that are available during the death bardo, which is why dream yoga and sleep meditation are considered essential preparations for conscious dying in the Tibetan tradition. Similarly, during deep meditation states, practitioners can experience what the masters call the small death, where consciousness temporarily separates from physical identification and encounters the same fundamental awareness that continues after bodily death. And these meditation experiences provide invaluable training for recognizing and embracing the liberation opportunities that will arise during the actual bardo journey, turning what would otherwise be a terrifying and confusing experience into a familiar landscape that can be navigated with skill and confidence. The text also reveals the crucial role that one's spiritual teacher or guru plays in the bardo process, explaining that the bond between student and authentic master transcends physical death and continues to provide guidance and protection throughout the 49-day journey. But this requires a level of devotion and connection that goes far beyond intellectual study or casual spiritual practice. The relationship must be based on genuine trust, surrender, and recognition of the masters' enlightened wisdom, creating what the Tibetans call samaya, or sacred commitment that binds the consciousness of teacher and student across lifetimes and through all states of existence. Masters who have achieved high levels of realization are said to be able to appear directly to their students during the bardo experience, offering guidance and protection that can mean the difference between liberation and rebirth. But they can only help to the extent that the student has opened themselves to receiving this assistance through their devotion and spiritual practice while still alive. And this is why the relationship between teacher and student is considered so sacred and important in the Tibetan tradition, because it provides a lifeline of wisdom and compassion that can rescue the soul from the confusion and terror that often arise during the bardo experience. Perhaps most importantly, the Tibetan Book of the Dead reveals that the ultimate purpose of the 49-day journey isn't punishment, judgment, or even rebirth, but education. Every experience in the bardo is designed to teach the consciousness about its true nature and provide opportunities for recognizing the empty, luminous awareness that is the essence of all beings. And this recognition is what the masters call liberation or Buddhahood, the awakening to our fundamental nature that transcends birth, death, and all the limited identities we normally take ourselves to be. The various peaceful and wrathful deities encountered during the journey are actually wisdom energies of the enlightened mind appearing in forms that the consciousness can relate to and potentially recognize as aspects of its own awakened nature, and the choices presented at each stage are opportunities to either embrace this recognition and achieve freedom or continue identifying with limited, separate selfhood that leads inevitably back to rebirth and suffering. This understanding completely transforms the meaning of death from something to be feared into the ultimate spiritual opportunity, a chance to achieve in the bardo what may have been missed during lifetime after lifetime of spiritual seeking. And this is why the Tibetan masters devoted so much energy to mapping this journey with such precision and developing practices to help souls navigate it successfully, because they understood that conscious death could become the doorway to ultimate liberation for anyone willing to prepare themselves properly. The text also contains warnings about various obstacles and traps that can derail the soul's progress during the bardo journey, And these warnings reveal profound insights into the nature of consciousness and the subtle ways that ego attachment can sabotage spiritual liberation even after physical death. One of the most dangerous traps described is the tendency for the consciousness to become fascinated by its own psychic powers in the bardo body, spending precious time experimenting with telepathy, clairvoyance, and miraculous abilities instead of focusing on recognition and liberation. And souls who fall into this trap often become what the masters called bardo spirits, beings who remain stuck in the intermediate states for extended periods, neither achieving liberation nor moving forward to rebirth. But eventually they too must complete the journey and make the choice between awakening and continued samsara. Another major obstacle is the attraction to pleasant experiences and the aversion to unpleasant ones, the same basic pattern of grasping that keeps souls trapped in cyclic existence during physical life. And this tendency becomes even more intense in the bardo because emotions and sensations are experienced with incredible vividness and power, making it extremely difficult to maintain the equanimity and detachment necessary for clear recognition of liberation opportunities, which is why the masters emphasize the importance of developing emotional balance and non-attachment through meditation practice while still alive, because these qualities become absolutely crucial for successful bardo navigation. The Tibetan masters also reveal that the bardo experience is influenced by what they call karmic winds, subtle energies created by past actions and mental patterns that can blow the consciousness in various directions like a leaf in a hurricane, and souls who haven't developed strong concentration and mindfulness during their lifetime often find themselves completely at the mercy of these karmic forces, unable to make conscious choices about their bardo journey or rebirth destination. This is why the preliminary practices in Tibetan Buddhism focus so heavily on purifying negative karma and accumulating positive merit, because these practices create favorable karmic winds that support the consciousness during the bardo experience rather than creating obstacles and distractions. And masters who have purified their karma and developed stable meditation realization often experience the entire 49-day journey as a smooth progression toward liberation rather than the chaotic roller coaster ride that awaits unprepared souls. The text describes various methods for working with karmic winds, including visualization practices, mantra recitation, and specific breathing techniques that can be applied during the bardo journey to maintain stability and clarity of awareness. But again, these methods can only be effective if they've been practiced and mastered while still in physical form, because the intensity of the bardo experience makes it extremely difficult to learn new techniques on the spot. What makes the Tibetan understanding so unique and valuable is its integration of precise psychological insight with profound spiritual wisdom, recognizing that the bardo journey is fundamentally a journey through the deeper levels of consciousness itself, and the various experiences encountered there are projections of the soul's own mental and emotional patterns rather than external realities that the consciousness passively experiences. This understanding empowers the soul to take responsibility for its bardo journey and actively participate in creating liberation rather than simply hoping for the best or relying entirely on external rescue. And this empowerment is what distinguishes the Tibetan approach from many other religious traditions that portray the afterlife as something that happens to the soul rather than something the soul actively participates in creating through its level of awareness and spiritual development. The masters teach that even the most terrifying bardo experiences can be transformed into liberation opportunities if the consciousness can remember that all appearances are projections of its own mind and respond with wisdom rather than fear. And this transformation happens not through fighting or avoiding difficult experiences but through embracing them with complete acceptance and recognizing their empty nature, which dissolves their power to create fear and attachment. The text also reveals the important role that physical preparation plays in successful bardo navigation, including specific dietary practices, sexual conduct guidelines, and lifestyle recommendations that support the development of a subtle body capable of maintaining awareness during the death process and beyond. The masters understood that consciousness and physical form are intimately connected, and the quality of awareness that continues after death is directly influenced by how the physical body and energy system were maintained during life. Which is why Tibetan spiritual practice includes detailed instructions for diet, exercise, sexual energy cultivation, and environmental factors that support the development of what they call rainbow body, a purified form of embodiment that allows consciousness to maintain clarity and stability during the transition process. These physical practices aren't separate from spiritual development but are understood as essential foundations for the inner work of meditation and wisdom cultivation, because of course, imbalanced physical system creates obstacles to the subtle awareness states necessary for conscious dying and bardo navigation, while a purified, refined physical form supports the development of the clarity and stability needed for recognizing liberation opportunities when they arise. Perhaps most remarkably, the Tibetan Book of the Dead reveals that the entire 49-day bardo journey can be completed in a much shorter time period by souls who have achieved sufficient spiritual realization, with the most advanced practitioners capable of achieving liberation within the first few moments after death when the clear light dawns, while others may complete the journey in 7 days, 21 days, or the full 49 days depending on the level of preparation and karmic complexity. This variability in bardo duration reflects the understanding that time itself works differently in the consciousness realms than in physical reality, with experiences that might seem to last for days or weeks in bardo time actually occurring in much shorter periods from an external perspective. And this time distortion is similar to what happens in dreams where elaborate storylines and complex experiences can unfold in the few minutes before awakening, suggesting that the consciousness operates according to different temporal laws when freed from physical limitations. The masters who achieved what they call bardo liberation while still alive report that the entire death process and afterlife journey can be navigated in a matter of hours or even minutes for those who have developed sufficient recognition skills, while unprepared souls may experience the full 49-day odyssey with all its challenges and opportunities before making their final choice between liberation and rebirth. The text concludes with what the masters consider the most important teaching of all, that death is not the end of life but the culmination of spiritual practice, the final exam that tests everything we've learned about the nature of consciousness and our capacity for wisdom, compassion, and liberation, and like any exam, success depends entirely on how well we've prepared ourselves through study, practice, and cultivation of the qualities that will be needed when the test arrives. This means that every moment of our current lifetime is actually preparation for the bardo journey. Every meditation session is practice for maintaining awareness during the death process. Every act of kindness is accumulation of the positive karma that will support us during the intermediate states. And every moment of recognizing the empty, luminous nature of awareness is training for the ultimate recognition that can lead to liberation from cyclic existence entirely. The masters teach that we don't have to wait until death to begin experiencing bardo states. We can start practicing right now through dream yoga, meditation, and conscious dying rehearsals that prepare us for the ultimate journey while also enriching our current experience of life with deeper wisdom and fearless compassion for all beings who are struggling with the same fundamental questions about consciousness, death, and the possibility of transcending the limitations that seem to define our existence. But here's the final secret that ties everything together and reveals why this knowledge has been kept hidden for so long. The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just a manual for navigating death and rebirth, it's actually a complete map of consciousness itself, describing the fundamental structures of awareness that operate not only after death but in every moment of our waking and dreaming experience. And once you understand these teachings, you realize that you're already traveling through bardo states every single day, already encountering the same liberation opportunities that will be available after death, and already making the same kinds of choices between wisdom and ignorance, attachment and freedom, fear and love that will determine your ultimate spiritual destiny. This means that mastering the bardo teachings isn't just about preparing for death, it's about awakening to the true nature of life itself, recognizing that every experience is an opportunity for liberation, every challenge is a chance to develop wisdom and compassion, and every moment is a doorway to the same clear light of awareness that dawns at the moment of death for those who have learned to recognize it. And this recognition transforms not only how we die but how we live, bringing the fearless joy and boundless compassion of the enlightened masters into our daily experience and relationships, creating what the Tibetans call Buddhahood in this very lifetime through the application of principles and practices that were originally designed to guide souls through the afterlife journey but turn out to be equally effective for navigating the bardo of ordinary life with wisdom, skill, and ultimate liberation as our goal. If this journey into the forbidden knowledge of the Tibetan Book of the Dead has awakened something deep within your soul, if these ancient secrets have resonated with the part of you that has always known there's more to existence than what meets the eye, then share this wisdom with fellow seekers and truth explorers who are ready to face the ultimate questions about consciousness, death, and liberation. Let us know in the comments which aspect of the 49-day journey speaks most powerfully to your spirit, whether you've had dreams or experiences that mirror these bardo teachings, and how this knowledge might transform your approach to both living and dying, because the path of awakening is walked together by souls who dare to seek the truth beyond all illusions and limitations. Thank you, fellow traveler of the mysteries, for joining this exploration into the most forbidden and transformative knowledge ever preserved by human consciousness. And may these teachings serve as a light in the darkness for all beings seeking freedom from the cycle of suffering and death.